Today on Trucks, the guys roll an 88 Blazer into the truck shop and tear into the suspension of their stock Chevy. They'll get started with a 6-inch lift before swapping out the axles front and rear, all that to make room for the 37-inch tires they'll stuff into the wheel wells. After that, we'll bring you back to earth with a Ford dually that breaks all the rules. That's all today on Trucks.
Welcome to this week's show, everybody. We're glad you're with us. Now, when it comes to hunting down a project truck, whether it's a sport truck or a four-wheel drive, without a doubt, some of the best deals out there are trucks from the late 70s up through the early 90s. Now, these are all new enough to have things like power steering, power brakes, and air conditioning, but they're also old enough that you can usually get a really good deal on one.
Now what we've got here is a 1988 Chevy K5 Blazer that we're going to call Project Big Blaze. Now the neat thing about these old Blazers is that they're a big, rugged, full-size pickup with V8 power, but they've also got a shorter wheelbase than a standard full-size pickup, which means they're a lot more agile and nimble out on a tight trail. Of course, the best thing about the Blazer and its counterpart, the Ford Bronco, they've got a removable hardtop.
Our truck is pretty standard to what you'll find out there in that it's been subject to years of neglect, has almost 300,000 miles on the clock, and everything on it's pretty well worn out. But as you can see, the body's still very straight with almost no rust on it. And all that, along with a $1,600 price tag, makes this rig a perfect candidate for our project.
The first thing we're going to deal with on Project Big Blaze are the axles and the suspension. Now we're going to use Goodyear's new 37-inch tall tires on this thing. So we need to have some sort of a lift to make sure we have some clearance in here. We also need some stronger axles to handle the abuse. So the first thing we're going to do is get this thing on the lift, take off the tires and the shocks, and then get a jack under the rear end to support it.
For our lift kit, we went to Skyjacker and got one of their 6-inch lifts for a full-size Blazer. Now this kit comes with brand new leaf springs as well as a drop steering arm, nitro gas shocks, dual steering stabilizers, as well as brake hoses and all the hardware you're going to need to get a good, safe 6 inches of lift.
Now since we're going to replace this rear end completely, there's a few things we need to take off that you wouldn't normally take off if you were just doing a lift kit, like these emergency brake cables, the drive shaft, this vent tube, and of course your brake lines. Now a little tip here, make sure you put a little cap on your brake line. That'll keep it from dripping and draining your master cylinder. Now all we have to do is take off these U-bolts and lower the rear end.
With the axle out of the way, it's time to get rid of the stock leaf springs. Now the bolts that hold them in place are going to be pretty rusty at this point, so you need to hit them with a good shot of penetrating lube to help knock them loose. Also, don't be surprised if you have to work at these dogs a little bit to get them loose.
Now with the stock springs off, you can see the considerable difference between those and these monsters from Skyjacker. Now these are going to give us a full 6-inch lift without the use of blocks, and they also have these wedges bolted right on to help correct severe drive shaft angles.
Now that we have the rear end completely apart, we need to do some cleanup under here. Now we're going to get rid of all the dirt and grease with a good all-purpose cleaner. Then once everything's dry, we'll hit it with a semi-gloss paint. Now the reason this step's so important is because it helps you locate any potential rust problems you might have.
Now, we know you've just been dying to know what kind of rear axle we're going to use on this thing. But the first thing you need to decide is what size tires you're going to use. That way you'll know what kind of gears to put in the differential. Now, another problem with these old Blazers is that the rear axle is narrower than the front axle, around 4 inches actually. So, we went to drivetrain specialists and had them custom make us a Dana 60 with a wider housing so it matches the track of the front axle. But we didn't stop there. We had them stuff it with 35 spline axles and 488 gears, which will work perfect with our 37-inch tall tires.
Of course, anytime you put on bigger tires, braking can become an issue, and these old stock drum brakes just aren't going to be enough to stop us with the kind of responsiveness we're after, especially at 60, 65 miles an hour. So we went to Stainless Steel Brakes and got one of their rear disc brake kits to go onto our rear DTS axle. Now this kit bolts right into place and includes everything from the caliper and rotor as well as the emergency brake.
Now for traction, we want this sucker to lock up when things get serious off-road. But when we're tooling down the street, well, we'd like it to act like an open differential. So that's where the ARB air locker comes in. Now this thing acts just like an open differential when it's off, but when you need that traction, you flip a switch, air runs down through this air line, activates a piston in the case here, and locks everything up just like a spool. Now finally, we got this special girdled cover that allows you to put a preload down on these bearing caps. Now this keeps the housing from flexing and makes it a little stronger. Looks good too.
Now we're ready to install the new leaf springs that slide right into the stock hangers. Now since our stock bolts did get rusty, we're going to go ahead and replace them with brand new grade 8 hardware. And to keep these from sticking in place and getting rusty on us, all we have to do is give them a light coat of grease before we slide them in.
Now we're ready to get our rear end in place and set our pinion angles. Now as you can see, we have the rear end jacked up against the springs with the perches in place. Everything's held loosely on with the U-bolts. Now if you're going to use a standard 2 U-joint drive shaft, the output of your transfer case and the yoke of your rear end need to be at the same angle if you want to stay away from vibration. Problem is, when you add a lift, you increase the angle of the drive shaft through your U-joints. Causes them to wear out quicker. So the ways to fix this is to lower the transfer case just a little bit and use shims to pitch up the front of the rear end. Problem is, that'll throw your angles out of whack, vibration will sneak in. So the best way to fix it, and what we're going to do, is use a drive shaft that has a CV joint up here, single U-joint back here. Now keep in mind, when you do it this way, the rear end has to point right at the transfer case. We're going to get it in place right now. Finally, with the truck sitting at ride height, we'll tack the spring perches in place and then weld them on.
With our rear axle welded up and ready to go, we hit it with a coat of paint and hung it in place with the supplied hardware. We'll follow that up with these brand new gas shocks and replace the stock bump stop with these huge red ones made specifically for our 6-inch lift.
We need to take a break, but stay with us because we got more Project Big Blaze right after this.
Later in the show, we've got an F-250 dually to show you that's not afraid to be different. But up next, we need to finish bolting our 6-inch lift kit and beefy front axle onto Project Big Blaze.
Welcome back to Trucks. Now if you're just joining us, we just finished putting a 6-inch lift and a Dana 60 in the rear of Project Big Blaze. Now we're going to get started on the front. Now these old Blazers are set up pretty nice from the factory with a steering stabilizer and dual shocks. But these old 10-bolt axles leave a little to be desired as far as heavy duty. So we're going to deal with that as soon as we get everything disassembled here.
Now that we have the rear end 6 inches in the air, we need the front to match it. And for that, we're also going to use Skyjacker and their brand new leaf springs with polyurethane bushings, 4 new shocks to replace the stockers, dual steering stabilizers, as well as a lowering kit for the sway bar.
Now with our front axle unbolted from the springs and the steering linkage and the brake lines, we'll go ahead and roll it out of the way to show you what's going to go in its place. Now for that, we also went to DTS and got one of their upgraded Blazer 10 bolts. Now this thing's been converted to 30 spline axles and Moser front shafts. These are 35% stronger. We also had them put in an Eaton carbon fiber Positrack, which is great for a front axle. Then finally we had them stuff it with the same 488 gears that were running in the back.
To get the new leaf springs ready for installation, you'll want to put a coat of grease on the bushing and then slide it into the spring. You'll also want to put some grease on the metal sleeve before putting it in place. Now the grease not only helps the installation go a little easier, but it's also going to keep your bushings from squeaking on you. Now all we have left to do is bolt the springs in place.
Now with the springs in place, it's time for the axle. And like we said, this is just a stock Blazer housing. So it's as simple as just putting it in place, bolting it down with the hardware that comes with the kit. Now is also a good time to put on the new drop steering arm that goes right in place of the stock arm. Now the purpose of this is to make sure your drag link doesn't get in a bind because of your lift kit.
Next up are the lowering brackets for the sway bar. Now what these do is lower the sway bar so it'll still be usable on your lifted truck, and they bolt right up to the frame where the old brackets used to be. Now once you have the new bushings installed into the factory brackets, you can go ahead and bolt up the sway bar.
Now like we said before, the original Blazer came with a steering stabilizer, but the Skyjacker kit upgrades it to duals. So the first thing you want to do is put this bracket on the axle, then take your steering stabilizers, pull them out halfway, mount the tie rod bracket on one end, and then slide it up onto the axle bracket. Then bolt the tie rod bracket to the tie rod, and then turn the wheels lock to lock to make sure you have proper adjustment.
Finally, we're ready for the front shocks. Now obviously they're going to bolt right up to the stock locations, but one thing you will notice about this kit is that each side comes with a gas as well as a hydraulic shock. Now this is going to give you all the performance you need, but it's also going to keep your suspension from being too stiff. We need to take a break right now, but stay with us. We'll be right back.
Up next on Trucks, we've got an aggressive wheel and tire combination to stuff into the wheel wells of our '88 Blazer. After that, we'll drop things into the weeds with a blue oval that's in a league of its own. Just can't get enough of trucks? Check us out online at truckstv.com.
Thanks for staying with us, everybody. Now that we have our lift kit and axles in place, we need to do some of the detail work like the brake lines. Now these longer steel braided hose came with the kit because the stock ones are too short. These are also a lot stronger than the stock lines. Now once you have all your lines connected, go ahead and tie them up out of the way and bleed the system.
Of course, we also have to hook up this air locker, which means running an air line from the differential up the passenger side frame rail to the engine compartment where we'll put in the compressor. Now to actuate the locker, you got a couple switches that you mount inside the cab. One controls the compressor, the other engages the locker. It's that simple. And the traction you'll get out of one of these things is second to none.
Now the axles we're going to run are shipped empty, so we'll need to fill them with some gear lube. For that, we're going to use Royal Purple synthetic gear lube. Now this stuff's not only going to keep things well lubricated to handle all the abuse we're going to throw at it, but it's also going to help keep our temperatures down.
Now here's another couple tips for you while you're buttoning everything up underneath here. Take a few minutes and check your body mounts. Make sure that they're still soft and that they're not cracked, and replace them if they're bad. Ours are in good shape, so we're not going to have to mess with those. Also, check your steering arms and your tie rod ends. Ours were completely shot. Somebody forgot to grease them, so we had to replace those.
Well, now that we have the suspension taken care of on Big Blaze, our big old bow tie needs a wheel and tire combination. And for the wheels, that was a really easy choice in these Mickey Thompson 15x10 Classic 2s. Now these wheels have fully polished, bigger openings, and the lug holes have steel inserts for greater strength.
Now I know we've mentioned before the size tires we're going to use on this project, but now you get a chance to see them up close. Now what we've got here is the Goodyear Wrangler MTR, which is an awesome off-road and rock tire, but it also does really well on a highway, especially for a real aggressive tire. The big news here is that now Goodyear is making these 37 inches tall, 12.5 inches wide for the rock crawling competitions. And that is the perfect size for this project.
Now we're ready to start dealing with that tired old small block we told you about at the top of the show. But for that, you're going to have to tune in next week.
So you've decided to upgrade your old brake lines with high-tech stainless steel. Well, that's great, but there is something that you do need to know. Now, regular steel brake lines are double flared at a 45-degree angle. Stainless steel, on the other hand, should never be double flared because it's too hard and it'll split on you. It needs to be single flared at a 37-degree angle, which means you need a special 37-degree flaring tool and fittings like these that we get from Speedway Motors. Now that's the only way to get stainless steel to seal up on you and not leak. When it comes to building a custom truck, most people don't think about using a big 1-ton dually to build a show truck out of. But the potential of these big trucks didn't go unnoticed by Rick Bottom of Mendota, Illinois. He used one as the foundation for Project Hotshot that he built for Alcoa Wheels.
Of course, Rick didn't waste any time jumping right into the suspension to get this F350 sitting on the ground. A complete 4-corner airbag suspension controls the ride height from normal to way down in the weeds, and that allows the truck to still be used for towing around all the other toys.
The interior is a place where you definitely want to spend some time thanks to these leather seats that have alligator inserts. Now a custom-made console holds an incredible speaker system in the back, and in front you have airbag controls, a stereo, as well as the DVD systems. Now the dash is decked out with white face gauges, and also it's got an entertainment center so you can check out your favorite movies.
The body of the truck also receives some attention in the form of a super slick Mandarin copper paint job that really comes to life with magenta flames that flicker down the sides all the way to the rear of the vehicle, where a smooth roll pan was added and a custom exhaust system pokes through it. And believe it or not, those are the stock tail light lenses that have been given a few custom paint touches.
Up front you can see that the bumper's been smoothed, and a trick billet grille put some tooth into the front of this thing. Now it also has a custom fiberglass hood that features carbon fiber and a ram air scoop. But it's what's under that hood that'll really get you going. We've got a V10 with a supercharger sitting on top of it. That'll put some power to those dual rear wheels.
All the way to the rear, we have yet another surprise in this matching magenta Rhino liner that's great for durability. A storage box was also added to keep junk from rolling around in the bed, which is proof positive that this truck really is used to haul stuff.
Well, this is a great example on how the bigger trucks can look just as good as the smaller ones. They're just a little harder to turn around in the parking lot. But out on the freeway is where these things really shine.
And now truck gear, parts, tools, and equipment for pickups and sport utilities.
You know, every vehicle has to have a fuel line running from the gas tank to the engine. Question is, where do you find those really cool stainless steel lines and braided hoses you see on all those show trucks and race cars out there? Well, the answer is as close as your nearest Summit catalog and their fuel line kits. Now, their kits include everything from the stainless steel hard lines and braided hoses to the fuel pump and filter, as well as all the fittings you'll need. Now you really do have enough to run your lines exactly the way you want them, and the cost for this entire kit from Summit is only $220.
Without a doubt, one of the coolest things to come along in a while is color changing paint. Now this stuff actually changes color depending on how the light hits it. Unfortunately, it's also very expensive, until now. Duplicolors come out with their color changing paint in a can that they're calling their Mirage paint. Now it includes the base coat, the color coat, and the clear coat. Once you put this stuff on, you honestly won't be able to tell it came out of a can. Duplicolor offers the whole kit for around 20 bucks.
Now, if you're restoring an old truck or Jeep, there's one area most people overlook that's definitely worth upgrading, and that's the heater. Now, most people do recognize Vintage Air as a company that makes awesome air conditioning systems, but they also have this universal heating unit that's compact enough to fit in tight spaces and also includes all the ducting, wiring, and controls you'll need to hook it up. Take the edge off a cold morning with this heater from Vintage Air for about 160 bucks. That's going to do it for Truck Gear. Here's a preview of next week's show.
The guys continue the buildup of their '88 bow tie. Next week, they'll work on the Pulse by dropping a GM crate motor into Project Big Blaze. After that, they'll show you how to get the most out of your tow vehicle with an easy do-it-yourself suspension upgrade. Finally, they'll show you some shop tools designed to make your life a whole lot easier. That's all next week on Trucks.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. We appreciate you hanging out with us.
Yeah, we got more trucks for you next week.
Oh, no. This is the engine for the Blazer.
No, I can't even see
You
it.
can't, don't even breathe
Come
on
on,
it.
don't even get close. Get back.
Go away. Surprise. Surprise. Get out of there.
Trucks is an RTM production.